All right, so in this video, we're going to discuss what is modules, more specifically, what are modules within Node.js. So there's a couple different types of modules that we can consume and use within our program. First, there's what we call core or built-in modules, and those are the modules that come with the Node.js language. And we'll do an example of how to include a core or built-in module into our program. There are third-party modules, which basically are modules that other people have created. And they release to NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. And we'll talk about how to consume modules from NPM. But these essentially is just a module that somebody else has created and we can bring down into our code and begin to use the functionality that's defined within those modules. Last but not least, we could build our own modules and begin to export them and use them in other places within our program. And so we'll do an example of all three. So an example of using core built-in modules, an example of using third-party modules, and an example of how to create our own modules and export them and use them in different places within our program. All right, so let's take a look at core built-in modules. We did a small example of this when we looked at the asynchronous functionality that Node.js presents. But let's go and bring that program back up here. And so here is an example that I showed in a previous video, where we use the file system core module. And again, this module is included within Node.js, is baked into the language. And so it's easy, accessible, and we can actually begin to pull down and just use some of the functionality that's there. So one of the methods that we use from the file system is the read file. The first argument that it takes here is going to be the file path to the resource that we're going to read from, the character encoding, and then here's the callback function that we're going to use to basically bring in these contents, or whenever that task is done, it'll call back with the contents within the subjects.txt file. So by including this file system module into our program, that exposes a number of different methods we can use from the file system. So here, if I wanted to go down, I could say file system dot, I can write to a file in the first argument here. And this is where you need to read the documentation to understand what arguments we can pass to the file or the write file method. And that's only going to come from this documentation that Node.js is going to give you. So if we jump back to our PowerPoint here, there's a list of core modules that we can take a look at here that are automatically included when we download Node.js. And so here's the file system module that we've been playing around with. And you'll see that there's a number of different methods that we can use. So if we continue to scroll down, we'll find the one that we just used, which is the file system write file. Let's keep scrolling down here. Here it is. All right. So if we click on this particular link here, it'll give us more information about the write file method, and it'll also give us an example of how to use that particular method within our program. So here you'll see an example where we can actually give the file path, this data attribute, which allows us to specify it's more specifically about how the data is traveled through that stream, and then here's the error method where we can actually check for there's an error within our program. And so again, like I said, you always want to use the documentation to help you understand what you can actually put as arguments to that particular method. But this is a small example of using the core built-in modules, and we'll do a more complete example when we talk about the HTTPS and the HTTP built-in core modules. All right, so let's look back at our program here and just finish off using the write file method. So here's the write file that we defined, and again, we're going to bring up our documentation. So let's go ahead and do a side-by-side of our documentation here. So here's the file system, and for the file system here, we have a write file method, and like I said, the first argument is going to be the file path. I'm sorry, here we go. The first argument is going to be the file path, right? And what I'll do is I'll just copy this for a quicker iteration, and I'll just paste this in, and I'll begin to define my own unique arguments within my program. So here will be subjects.txt. This is going to be the data that I'll be reading to the stream that's going to write it to the file. And then here's my callback parameter of error, which is I can define and check if there's an error in this file, or that if it's properly working. If not, if there is no error, the file has been saved. All right. But for my data attribute here, what I'm going to do is essentially just give it some information. So I'll say var data equals hello world. Okay, and so at that point we're good to go. And so if we save this and I bring up my file explorer and I run this in the browser here, making sure that I'm in a Node.js series. Yep. So now let's go and run this here. And you'll see that hello world has been written to that file. Now it's overwritten everything else within the file because I'm basically calling that file and basically starting from scratch. But nonetheless, I've defined what's in data, and I could also just put hello world here within the second argument, and that would suffice as well. So if I were to just basically put this here and get rid of it as the variable, this would also work. I save it. And let me make this just a little bit bigger so we can actually see all the text. So if I save this here and I go back to my file, let's go ahead and actually go and delete the contents of this here just to make sure that everything is working as intended. So now if I save this and run it, you'll see that hello world still works. And so the data attribute is what the second argument is what we're going to pass into the stream that's going to write it to the file. And so you would need the documentation to kind of understand the various arguments that we could pass in. So the third argument is going to be the character encoding. That's an option. It's optional. You don't have to pass in the third argument, but if you were, these are just the options you could pass into this write file method, and how the developer, whoever created the write file, has defined the write file method. And so, like I said, you need this documentation to help you understand all the various options or the various arguments that can be passed into the method. Again, we're going to do some more examples of core built-in modules, but there's a lot of different methods that we can use that come with Node.js, and this is the documentation here that we can look at that's specifically from Nodejs.org on core built-in modules. Like I said, more to come on built-in modules, but nonetheless, feel free to play around with this. Look at this documentation, explore it. A lot of it may not make sense right now, but later on in the next few videos here, we're going to talk about the HTTP module and talk about the HTTPS core built-in module and how to create a server and render our work within the browser. Stay tuned.